Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the industry panel for digital environments in 21st century visual media. My name is Reese, and I'll be chairing this panel today. I'm on the MIDSPOP committee as one of the events managers and a PhD candidate at the University of Birmingham. And today we'll be exploring topics surrounding the creation and acquisition of digital environments in contemporary visual media. That is ranging from the practical to the conceptual. Discussions between our panelists will concern the interdisciplinary nature of such practices, as well as the crossover between academia and industry experience in the field, and have been informed by the experiences of our very own practitioners. Speaking of whom, allow me to introduce our three practitioners for the day. First, we have Lauren Ash, a game designer at Crystal Dynamics. She is an FSMU Guildhall graduate with an MA in Interactive Technology. Thanks for being here today, Lauren. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so game designers are basically like right field practitioners, like you were saying, that make games fun, right? But we're really associated with the player experience. So from hour 1 to hour 100 to the core mechanics that players are using very regularly. So I kind of involved in all of that connection thread of the game itself, and I take user experience to make it better.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much. Next up is Vincenzo Barcasi. Is that right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Senior concept artist at Sledgehammer Games and adjunct professor at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. Thanks so much for joining us on this panel, Vincenzo. Please tell us about yourself.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm a senior concept artist at Sledgehammer Games, known for making Call of Duty games. And I also am an adjunct professor at my alma mater, which is the Academy of Art University, which I teach basically conceptual art classes ranging from environment design, vehicle design, to character design.
Fantastic. That's amazing. Thank you very much. And finally, we have Claudia Kowalczuk, a CG generalist interning at Side FX. In the past, Claudia has worked on an Oscar-nominated film and is an NCCA graduate with an MA in digital effects. Huge thanks for lending your expertise today. Tell us a bit about your line of work, Claudia.
Hi there. So I'm currently working at Side Effects. I'm mostly a generalist. Right now, I'm kind of in a transition period, teaching instructors material on Houdini, which is a procedural effects software. And digital effects aren't necessarily as common as, say, like fields like animation, for example. So there's kind of high demand for it at the moment, especially because also because of what's been going on this year as well. A lot of people are kind of seeking ways to do things faster and do things like work smarter rather than harder, which is what Houdini is about. So that's anything from like procedural modeling and texturing to environment creation, coding. You have to kind of think with kind of both sides of your brain. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I don't have any specialty necessarily. I'm doing a bit of everything, and right now I'm just making teaching material for instructors, as I say, to teach them the handles to the software.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, especially since we want to move with the times at the moment, considering recent events in the world. But thank you so much to all three of you for attending today from these industry giants. We're very excited to hear your thoughts on this great subject. And remember, for those of you viewing remotely, if you have a Twitch account, you can leave a question of your own for our panelists in the chat. Or you can tweet them, making sure to include the hashtag MIDSPOP20. That's with an S, MIDSPOP20, where our moderator, Lucy, will collect them to ask during the second half of the hour. But for now, let's get straight to it and kick off with our first question to set the tone. The first question I'd like to ask our illustrious panel today is on the intersection between academia and your technological industry. How has your academic background informed or even influenced your work? I'll go to Lauren with this first, if that's all right, and we'll just work through things. The later questions will be a little bit more free flow. But Lauren, what do you think about this?
Yeah, for me, academia completely influenced how I got into games. SMU Guildhall, and is short for Southern Methodist University Guildhall, was kind of my gateway into game design. I had actually attended the University of Iowa prior for creative writing, and I did some like business, like startup user interface and user experience work, but had never really brought it into the interactive field. And doing game design at SMU was actually my first like real game development experience, not just making something right for your phone, like making something for like people to play on a computer. I ended up making a mobile game as well, like, so I guess for your phone as well. And it was really interesting because I never had thought about studying games as a medium. I played games all my life and was just like, I love Kingdom Hearts, like I love Final Fantasy. I just want to play games. And then I never thought that I could ever get into games because I don't know how to code, which was actually untrue. The barrier for entry to me was I knew HTML, I knew CSS, I actually had learned a little bit of like Python, but like that wasn't real coding. Like real coding was like C++. But it turns out that there's like a whole field called game design and level design where it's just about putting together other people's artworks and effects and then making them all happen together. And that's super, I was like, yes, I want that. I want to be that person that just puts it all together.
So it really is the sort of intersection between everything,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, I know. It's the intersection between everything. You have to know just enough about everything. And I like to say my sister is going to be like a neuroscientist and I'm the game designer. Like she can go be really smart, right, in that one thing, but I'm just really good at just a little bit of everything. And so I liked that aspect of it. And academia led me right straight into it. And now I'm in the industry.
Brilliant. Well, is that something that you can relate to, Vincenzo?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll kind of
first technical difficulty.
I got too excited. Too excited, guys. Yeah, no, definitely. So as you know, as an adjunct professor, I'm really into academia. I actually went to the Academy of Art before I started teaching there. And I would say my background in traditional illustration and traditional art principles is what brought me to working as a concept artist. At the Academy of Art, I learned how to do basic anatomy drawing, perspective, color theory, all the basic fundamentals you'd have in art and design. But pre all of that, I also drew as a kid, always was drawing from the youngest age I can even remember. My mom likes to always tell a story that before I could even physically draw, I would make them draw for me before I could actually pick up a pencil and do it myself. So I've always had art and design in my life growing up. I always knew I wanted to be an artist, and I always knew that I wanted to do something creative. I just didn't know what. I eventually got a degree in graphic design first and started working as a graphic designer, making logos, type design, brochures and pamphlets. But then I realized halfway through my education that I was always interested in drawing and doing fantastical environment designs and worlds. And so with that, I decided to continue my education, learn more about that. And then eventually out of school, I got a job at Crystal Dynamics where I met Lauren. I worked there for about a couple years, working on Marvel's Avengers and really learning the ins and outs of game development and working in the industry as a concept artist. And it's been a really fun ride, and I'm glad I'm still a part of it.
I was going to say, it sounds like a wild ride, and especially seeing as you've you've made so many contacts along the way as well, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. And then eventually, I actually went back to school to teach. Through my old instructor reached out to me and said, "Hey, we really like what you've been doing, and we would like you to share your knowledge and expertise to the students." And so I decided to go back and teach. And so the great thing about teaching, along with doing concept art, is that not only am I practicing the fundamentals of art and design as an illustrator, but I'm also having to be on top of new trends and technology to teach my students as well. So it kind of always keeps me fresh and always on my toes.
Yeah, it sounds like you have to be really in touch with them at the ground level, so to speak.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And Claudia, how about yourself? To repeat the question, the intersection between the academic background and its sort of influence on your work.
Yes, I'm also very much from an interdisciplinary background. I've always been a creative person, but my subjects were always like a mix between art, music, languages, and science. So for my BA, I actually studied liberal arts, which is kind of a combination of different modules. Like you can basically study anything you like, provided you have the intro requirements. And that was kind of reflective of my various interests, and also of my uncertainty, I guess, of what I wanted to become at the time. I was really confused back at my undergrad. And the idea of just kind of sticking with one career path, like one specific thing, always seemed really daunting to me. It's like, no, I don't want to do this one thing for like the rest of my life. You know, I could change my mind. And I'd say like music and art in particular were always things that I enjoyed combining together. So music production, for example, is something I love doing in my spare time and have some background in. And I could always get sort of lost in composing, but then I have to bring it all together through some sort of technical software, right? In this case, I use Logic Pro a lot. It's just my favorite. And you have to sort of engage your brain in different ways at different stages of your project. And I really love that. And so it emerged later that I went to do an MA in digital effects. And I found it to be sort of the perfect combination between science and art. And it was like another ideal subject for me. I use mostly Houdini, as I say, for visual effects. And its procedural nature requires you to use sort of a combination of technicality, but also artistry. So that kind of work really stimulates my brain. You have to be creative, but you have to think critically as well. And you have to problem solve every single day.
It's sort of the ultimate polymath path, right? Where you're interested in so many different things.
Yeah, but when you find a solution to the problem, it's the best feeling ever. And you learn a lot every day.
I'm sure. Well, tell us a little bit about, of course, this event is called Digital Environments, but tell us a little bit about your role with acquisitions, because I believe that your background sort of, you have experience in that side of things as well.
So that's the second question, right?
Yep.
Okay, we're straight on to the second question.
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, I love creating kind of otherworldly settings in my work. And I guess my answer is going to be a little unusual. Like I don't do very many like CG environments so much as I like to use both a combination of like acquisition and effects and combining that into like a seamless image.
Oh, okay.
So I actually try to shoot real life environments as much as I can, and then place often abstract effects within them. Acquisition is really important to me, and I love getting into sort of the cinematography side of things and taking something of the everyday, but then combining that with an abstract effect to make it look like it's all part of the same world. And so turning that ordinary setting into something a little more captivating. So that's the aim anyway. It's not necessarily always successful, but you know, it's like trial and error. And whether the end result is a success or not is very much subjective. But yeah, it's always a really fun journey. It's like, well, I can take something that I'm around every day, but I can turn it into something special.
Yeah, of course, it's like the juxtaposition between the real life elements and the CG and sort of the blurring lines in between. How about you, Vincenzo? Are there certain, environments that you personally feel more drawn to creating than others?
Yeah, so I have a real thing for science fiction based environments. I think I'm a little bit of a futurist in that regard, that I like to kind of see not only just really cool looking shape design and also just in architectural design, but also thinking about what could potentially the space look like in the future on a more believable grounded stage as well. I think that's really exciting. A lot of my inspiration came from, there was actually a concept artist back in the 70s and 80s. His name was Sid Mead. He did a lot of the original designs he did Blade Runner, of course, and many others. And he's a great source of inspiration. He's like the true futurist. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And what's their appeal for you? Is it, the sort of the what could be, like you said, or is it the kind of thing where you're trying to imagine something that is at this point beyond the bounds of reality? What's the appeal for you?
A little bit of both, honestly. Just the I use this term a lot with my students, but I like the authenticity of having a believable level or world that looks like something you can actually live in, looks like something that is in the future, feels real and tangible. as opposed to just like purely fantastical based. It just really has a bigger sense of immersion. And so I get really excited when I capture that authenticity in my work.
Yeah, it sounds like there is sort of a thread of immersion coming through so far, both with your work and Claudia's work, of course. How about you, Lauren? What are you personally drawn to creating?
Yeah, no, I actually like on both of their answers, like Claudia, like what you're talking about is straight into like, right, a multimedia like experience, like AR, like you're in your bedroom and then you take it, or you just pan your phone around and then suddenly, right, you're in a totally different area. I'm 100% drawn to, right, those cyberpunk type of dystopian futures. So, you know, it's not terrible to say for me, but when like all of this was just starting and going on, I'd go outside and I'd see all these terrible signage and I'd see everyone in masks and I was like super giddy. I was just like, yes, we've made it into this terribleness. Right, because the hope of dystopia is like it gets better, like then the people come together, right? That's what dystopia means. So I was like, oh yes, humanity, we will rise again. Right?
Is that actually something you try to try and encapsulate in your work then?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always about that hope of coming together, and right, there's always that. I feel there in all of our lives, there's always that other force. There's a force out there that's trying to stop you. Right. And so as a game designer, I will talk less maybe about the practical of the environments and talk more about, I think, how they feel. Right. Because that's what I do in my work. And so, right, there's this force that's trying to box you in, that's trying to press against you all the time. And I feel that, especially for creatives, it's all about like pushing back. And so in my work, I want to know, how do we push back against that force? And so I'm really drawn to those dystopian kind of cyberpunk environments. I'm also a bit of a futurist, right, Benny? You know that. So that's probably why. But it is about making it something where people look at it and they go, even if it's super fantastical, like Avatar with like Pandora, right? It's still
absolutely, yeah.
could live there, you see. And so it still felt like there was something grounded that you could push against, right? Or push with, right, if it's a good force. And I'm going to pour my coffee during my talk so that it doesn't interrupt anybody else's.
Thank you. Got to get that coffee kick in the morning.
Yep, of course.
Claudia, do you feel that sort of push-pull aspect that Lauren mentioned in your own work? You know, especially when you're approaching a new project that involves the creation or acquisition of environments. What do you sort of work through first?
When I start a new project, you mean?
Yeah.
The first thing I do, there's never really a pattern with it, but the number one thing is always like references for me. I need to study real life first. I need to study the world. I need to get out there, explore, take photos, watch films, that all that stuff inspires me. And you do want your work to be tangible and to have that sort of realism. You want to avoid like the uncanny valley. That's like I feel like so many films today like trip up on that, and I feel like not enough actually look into references. For me, the research portion of the project is like 30 to 50% of the project as a whole.
That much.
Without it, even if it's something like not just getting images, but getting an idea for the color palette that you want, the theme that you want going, just like brainstorming that is a good starting point, because starting for me is always the hardest part of any project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all relate to that in some way. How about you, Lauren? Going back to Lauren, when you're sort of approaching a new project like that, can you relate to those sort of feelings? Starting is the worst part for you, is the hardest part, or do you find the middle or the end? What do you find most challenging?
So I'll take this from more of a level design standpoint, because I've also worked as a level designer, and the level designer is the one that puts the pieces together, right? The game designer is the one that says, how do you move within those pieces, right? Honestly, is both. It is actually great for me to start, right? It's that new idea. I love starting new projects. And 30 to 40% of it is just research, right? It's not even work. So when we get to the work part, oh man, I fall. Right? I I just don't. I think Vinny and Claudia, you can both relate to it when you're working with other people and you have these designers will come in. Sometimes they have that great idea and they realize halfway through we've overscoped, we've done too much, right? And then suddenly you need to. It's not just about finishing at that point. It's about cutting back. And so for me, what's really important when I look at the level design when I start is that scope. It's trying to make it as easy as finished as possible for me. Just because it is really hard to finish something, especially working at these larger studios with multiple people. And so I actually look at I look at the end more than I look at the beginning, and then kind of plan backwards that way. And so from all the reference images, for realism, if you're making a cyberpunk environment, but then also for how would the player move through the space? So and what is the emotion of that space? So if it's supposed to feel claustrophobic, Crystal Dynamics is known for its Tomb Raider titles. So if it's claustrophobic, you'll have those very tight crawl spaces. If you're escaping, it's going to be different than if you are supposed to be filled with a sense of joy or wonder, right? And so building the space for that.
I think that's really fascinating, visualizing the environment around you, but also you brought up a point with the expectations perhaps of your employers or of your clients versus the technological limits of it as well. Yep. Pick up on that point, Vincenzo, have you had such difficulties before? And especially, questions with your students and stuff like that, how do you sort of address that?
Oh yeah, totally. All the time. I feel like as a concept artist, you're basically consistently throwing things at the dartboard and then just hoping that something sticks. I've rarely, even in my professional experience, ever threw a concept out and it was the right one the first time. That never happens. Usually there's a round of 2, 3, 4, sometimes up to 10, 15 iterations of the same thing. And it just comes down to really getting into a space that feels believable, authentic, and just it feels right and looks right. I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what Lauren and Claudia have said, but I would say as a concept artist, my research is probably a good 3/4 of it, honestly, more than actually doing the work. Mostly because if the designs don't feel believable or they don't feel like they contextualize correctly in the story standpoint, or in the case of a video game, how the player interacts with the space, then it doesn't really matter how good it looks because it doesn't really help sell that idea. So a lot of times what I try to push with my designs is just authenticity. Does it feel believable and does it feel tangible in a realistic sort of standpoint, but also still fulfill the fantastical element of a CG type of environment. So a lot of that is going through research and just making sure to refine that until you kind of hit to something that feels right. But then also using mood and color and atmosphere to also help sell a story. Kind of what Lauren was saying, when I was working on Tomb Raider, a lot of the spaces were claustrophobic. So a lot of it had to use really dark lighting, use very small confined spaces, and give little hints to the player that they had to squeeze through small spaces. And that really kind of helps sell the claustrophobic aspect. And that's the same with any sort of environment. If you're going for a very vast sort of majestic sort of cityscape, having these really tall buildings and using the right type of color and lighting to help kind of give that sense of euphoria with the environment.
Sure.
Yeah,
it all comes back to that point of immersion, right?
Immersion,
that's
exactly.
One of the threads that we've been covering so far is that whether it's a static image or whether it is something full motion, you want the viewer, the audience, to be immersed by it and to believe it, right?
Right, of course.
And on that subject of believability, I'll kind of open this up to you guys. What elements of or examples, I guess, of digital environments in recent years, whether that's maybe film, television, video games, which ones have you personally found to be the most compelling? You can think of any examples from the top of your head. I know there was Tomb Raider mentioned earlier, and a couple of others as well.
I can start this off. I think Blade Runner, the latest Blade Runner, and Westworld have been for me the environments that felt the most believable and used. And if you actually go through the documentary of how they made those, the television show and the movie, they spent a lot of time researching what a dystopic world would look like from a more realistic lens. And I think that as a sort of CG project, that they're also very inspiring for a lot of other places, and what a lot of people reference them for that type of work, because there's such a level of authenticity to their design and really it feels like a believable space you can walk in, and it feels like, this could potentially be a real future.
Absolutely. You're a man after my own heart. Westworld is absolutely fantastic.
Westworld's great.
Yeah, I'm the Westworld person that only watched the movie like back in the 80s. Like I haven't actually seen the new show. So I'm like, yeah, Westworld. Oh, not the one from like, like 30, 40 years ago. It's good. You should watch it.
Fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, it's great.
How about the rest of you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also a massive fan of Westworld, but I think there are so many, it's kind of overwhelming to pick a favorite. For that reason, and I never really have favorites because each kind of environment, each film has something different to offer. But if I was to say, like, off the top of my head, there was one film that stuck out for me a few years ago at a film festival, and it was a German short film by Till Novak. It was called Dissonance. And it's kind of a mixture of live action and animation. And it's about a guy on a mental journey, and he's kind of stumbling between reality and the dream world. And it's just the most gorgeous short that I have seen in many years. Yeah, and it was very immersive, even though like it was all, mostly animation, and it had all those surreal environments. Every shot was sort of like a painting as well. Like you could pause at any second, and you could frame the still as well, which I think also makes a good piece of work in terms of like cinematography as well, is when you can like go through virtually any shot, any second in that film and frame it. I just love visually stunning pieces. Yeah, and that one was particularly captivating because it also combined it with a really good soundtrack. And
of course, yeah.
I just like elevated it to a whole new level, I think, because I think that's another important part in films as well, and it helps in the immersion very much. Although I know this is focused around environments mostly, but yeah, I think it comes together in the end.
No, it's always great when you've got a solid soundtrack to whatever you're watching or listening to or experiencing yourself if it's a video game, and it's about having these products as little pockets of experiences, right? And in your example, Claudia, I haven't actually seen it myself, but it sounds like it plays with that liminal space between what's real and what's imagined or illustrated, right?
Well, the aim, it's very simple. Like it's not a very overly complex plot, which I also think often makes very good films, is when you don't overcomplicate it, right? You have sort of a solid aim. But that inspired one of my projects that I did at university, actually, which focused on mental health. Again, very sort of surreal, abstract concepts, and not everyone always understood like what the visual piece was about, but you had to do your best to kind of communicate it, and the audience kind of had to interpret it in their own ways. But you have to be careful when you're working on these surreal pieces to not make it too abstracted, because it still needs to be immersive, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, choosing the theme is also always a risk. Like you have to be careful not to alienate the audience too much. Yeah, that's also a challenge.
For sure. But then on the other hand, that can sometimes work to in your favor. Lauren, I mean, do you have any particular works that you can think of where that alienation is used to good effect, or more broadly, do you have just any kinds of digital environments that you've seen in film or television or whatever that you're particularly drawn to?
Yeah, so I mean, I have the answer to that second part. Claudia, have you ever seen the film Brazil?
Don't think so. No.
It's an old one. That's me. I'm the old film person. That's who I am now. I think maybe as a writer, right? Or as a writer, like we just look at all of the films, right? Like we have to study film if you want to do screenwriting. So I think that's where it comes from. One of my best friend's favorite movies is a movie called Brazil, and it's not about Brazil. It talks about exactly what you're saying. It's in 1984, right? Orwellian society. I think it was made in the 70s, or I think it was probably the 80s. And then, yeah, definitely 80s, because then in the dream world, this guy's just an office worker, like hates his job, but is okay, flies under the radar. But then in the dream world, right, he's like this flying winged Icarus prince, like destined to save, right, the girl. And then how does that intersect, right? And then it even has, I feel like Inception was even somewhat influenced by this movie because it has a lot of those different types of environments, but then also the way the plot moves is very interesting as well. So I highly recommend that to you, Claudia, if you've never seen it, because I think it's a feature length version of the short film you were kind of talking about.
Yeah,
and
the
so
title rings a bell. I'll give it a go. Thank you.
Yeah, it really intersect with the kind of things that you work on as well. That's absolutely fantastic.
No, yeah, so please go do that. As for me, I don't know, alienation is something that as a game designer doesn't always really fit with the paradigm. Like, you do want things to be alien to the player, but at the same time, like, it's to cause them to run away from it, not necessarily to, like, it's to create a different type of immersion. I think that the best example of alienation, this is so cheesy, is the first movie, Alien. In that when you enter that space into the womb of all of the egg pods, that's supposed to feel completely overwhelming and dire, and it does, and it achieves that. As for something that's my favorite, I am loving The Mandalorian. I absolutely love what they've done with the Star Wars environments there and the cinematography, because if you look at how they developed it, they actually used VR to make some of the sets. Like, they really pushed the technology. And so at first I enjoyed it as a fan, and then I watched kind of the making of, and then started to enjoy it even more, as a creator.
Well, as a massive fan of the expanded universe as well now it's called Star Wars Legends, of course, but as a fan of the expanded universe, I'm absolutely all over that. And I just very quickly want to go to some of the comments that we're getting in. Enjoying the amount of love for sci-fi, cyberpunk, and dystopia and multimedia in digital environments with the hashtag #MidsPop2020 panel. Some of my favorite game genres. And get another one. Oh, haha, respect. The start of any project is indeed difficult. Just echoing the sentiment earlier. The big theme of combining the fantastical with a grounded, livable reality within which players feel they could inhabit, exploring boundaries whilst maintaining a sense of familiarity. I think that's quite well put, sort of concisely put there. We're talking about Westworld TV and the TV show and the movie. Both are great in their own way, and the behind the scenes on The Mandalorian is indeed fascinating. So just some of the comments we're getting in there through Twitch and through Twitter. So we're coming on to the second half of our hour, but I do have a couple more. I just want to tease out a couple more answers from you guys for some questions that have been put to us. For example, to what extent do you believe your profession requires a multidisciplinary approach, and why is it important? I know we've actually been speaking about this a lot so far in our previous questions, and I think your answers kind of hint that interdisciplinarity is very important. It's the crux of what you guys are all about. But I'll put it to the group. How important do you think it is, and why?
I mean, my answer is easy. I'm a game designer, right? Like, and in sometimes and in some fields, the more you do of game design, the less you'll do of everything else. But you still have to be able to communicate to artists, to programmers, to those in technical art or VFX, to those all the way down, even other level designers and other environment designers. So for me, interdisciplinariness, is crucial. But then it also, for me, is incredibly fun. I get to explore and then learn about a little bit of everything, right? Yeah. And then be amazed when someone who's really, really dedicated and mastered one aspect, comes back and I'm like, I could never do that. So for me, an interdisciplinary approach is absolutely critical to my work. But I'd love to hear other answers about it, because I'm the easy one. I'm like, yes.
Do you guys agree?
Yeah, totally. I would say that in terms of being a concept artist, that's very, very critical, actually. A lot of what makes really believable concept art and also inspiring concept art is people who go beyond just looking at pop culture for reference, but they actually go to the source of it. So I tell my students all the time that if you're looking to design a really cool looking, like cyberpunk type outfit, to study fashion design, to see what other designers in that field, not related to pop culture at all, what they're creating and how they're creating stuff, and pulling inspiration from that. Or if you're going to create an environment, look at city landscapes and how architecture works and how lighting on architecture works. And that's all these little sort of details that help add to the overall flavor of what you're designing. So I think it's really important. And the more you have of that, the more believable and more, I want to say original that you could probably become with that. You have a little bit more original ideas rather than just looking purely through pop culture for your references.
Absolutely fantastic advice there. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I actually want to piggyback off of that really quick for any of our viewers out there that want to study game design. As you know, right, Vinny worked on, or they're known for the Call of Duty games. A lot of the multiplayer map designs can be traced all the way back to the original Quake and Wolfenstein. And so if you look at one of Halo's first maps, for any FPS people out there, or first person shooter, excuse me, for those that are not familiar with game jargon, there was, I believe in the original Halo was a map called Blood Gulch. That map actually came directly from one of Quake's like Two Towers maps. I mean, almost one for one, but because now modern games, right, if they just looked at that Blood Gulch map and tried to recreate it, you have to go all the way back to the source. And I think that's incredibly important. And so that's some really cute, like it's an old game. So that's some cute fun fact for you there.
No, but that really is. It's about drawing from all these different sources, right? Does your work involve that, Claudia? You know, drawing from all these different kinds of sources, no matter how old they are, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I like to do a combination of like primary and secondary research as well. As sometimes like my inspirations come directly from just exploring different environments. So those, during my master's degree especially, I worked on a project that was particularly rewarding. It was sort of an opportunity to do a little bit of everything, and I decided to do like a standalone, and everything from like the initial concept art to directing and shooting to choreography, effects, and also making my own soundtrack to go with it. So I was sort of researching in all these different areas, like looking for, okay, what soundtrack could I make? How is that going to fit in with the environment that I found where I want to shoot? That location was actually full of statues. So like it was a beautiful location right by the lake. And I had this idea, okay, well, I could do like an abstract statue that comes to life, you know, and starts kind of interacting with the other statues in that environment, but I have to make it look seamless at the same time. And how do I kind of join it all together? So that came with its own challenges, but it was again the sort of like, if I'm able to make that connect between the effects that I'm creating from scratch and the environment that already exists, then I could potentially make it into something special. But you have to like really think about the order of things as well. You know, you diving into like, say, so I worked with like a motion, I worked with motion capture a lot for that project. So I had a dancer actually, and one of the challenges was I couldn't shoot at the location until after I'd done my mocap. So I had to get the dancer to pretend like she was already in the environment and interacting with these things. So I actually went out to the location twice, and I mapped out the entire location and tried to get her to visualize where everything was and sort of roughly measure it out. Okay, you're stood like next to this massive sculpture, you know, you want to like reach out with your hand. Like you had to like really sort of, I had to roughly like measure it out, and I was really nervous whether it would work, but fortunately it did. But obviously she needed a soundtrack to dance to as well. So I'm like, okay, well, before I even start my project, I need a soundtrack already to like begin with. So it's a lot of like, I guess, pressure when you're going for an ambitious project, but it's definitely very rewarding when you can make it all connect in the end.
Wow, it sounds like you're trying to plan, you know, a lot of steps in advance that, you know, inevitably lead into one another, but you're trying to second guess yourself almost from the comments.
I'm getting like AAA PTSD right now. I'm like, yep, sounds like my projects. Audio is like, but I can't do the audio and the soundtrack until I see the level. I'm like, no, we've got to shoot mocap and we have a dancer coming in. Like that's definitely.
You always have to juggle with a project, you know, and I think especially on group projects as well, knowing a little bit of everything and having an idea for what a certain task involves, you have not just an appreciation for other team members, but you also could jump in and help out potentially if you stumble on any issues down the line, right, during your project. Like someone could take over because, hey, I can do a bit of compositing or something, like let me do that because we're running out of time and you are struggling with this effect, you know, like you sort of have to juggle tasks, especially in a group project.
Well, actually, you know, that's a really pertinent point. But speaking of running out of time, we've just got one more question that I want to put you before we go to the Twitch and Twitter chat for their questions. Now, as your industry is still a largely male-dominated one, we're going from the digital environment to the actual environment of the game industry now, or the digital media industry. As it's a still largely male-dominated one, to what extent is diversity important in your line of work?
Yeah, who wants to take that first?
It's a loaded one.
You're ready for that one.
How about you, Vincenzo?
How about me?
Oh, yes, the man goes first. I see.
Oh! All right,
it's almost like we set this up. No, please.
Okay, I'll go. Diversity is very important, and we're always trying to get just a wide variety of people of different race and genders in this sort of industry. As you can say, there is a primarily male-dominant industry right now, but I feel like that's starting to change a little bit. We're starting to see more females get into it, but it's just important because they bring a different flavor. And I think a lot of the typical things I see in sort of entertainment, at least, is a lot of kind of over sexualization of women. I like to see less of that in the future. I like to see more strong, dominant women as lead characters and guiding the story, and less of the typical macho man type persona.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely, in that diversity is incredibly important, right? There's a lot of baggage that comes from being an industry that has been traditionally male-dominated, as I'm sure is true in every male-dominated industry. But we've already seen aspects of different games, especially in the indie scene or in those smaller projects on Steam. We've seen tons of games come out from diverse voices, from people of color, from minorities, from women, right, from the trans community. And that's what the future of gaming could be. And so for me, it's incredibly important, not just with diversity, but also with accessibility, right? Having as many different people you can make the game, and as having many of different people you can play the game, right? And so...
do you agree with that point of accessibility, you know, when you're drawing some experiences from all different sources as well? Claudia?
Yeah, definitely. To talk about the whole discrimination side of things, there's definitely a lot of pressure in that regard. I wouldn't say it's it happens everywhere, but people don't always take you seriously, you know, and especially if you work in the bigger studios, you really see that. There's the language is different, you know, talking to males versus talking to females, especially I find between the leads and junior artists. I saw a lot of the wrong people kind of getting pushed around for no reason, and it is a lot of pressure, especially if you're in a position where you're teaching or you have a big role, right, in a project. Again, there are exceptions, don't get me wrong, but it still sort of happens. And I think it's important, diversity, insofar as it gives us more equal confidence. We don't have to worry about this discrimination, so it gives us more confidence ultimately in our own work as well, you know?
Yeah. And I will say that, yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, Claudia, because I do really feel that sometimes, especially in leadership, it feels kind of like the boys' club, right? They're all there, they're all using the right words that they understand together, and then you try to enter that. Well, it's not the right boy and girls club, right? It's not the we are all equal here club. It is the boys club, right? And I think that for me, it's really important for, say, members of that organization to either to voluntarily, right, step down, or voluntarily, right, promote women. Because if we right, as a culture, don't have these people of color and these diverse voices in a position of power, then we won't have those experiences translated down, right, to the juniors, like you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your, your dedicated and very detailed responses, everyone. And we're getting a fantastic response from the various chats as well. A fantastic point about accessibility and the diversity of production and reception environments. Just one of the comments there. But we're actually going to go to the questions now. They are really coming in thick, hard, and fast. So we've got to go to them now before this runs out. We've got 15 minutes left, so let's try and get through as many of them as possible. Let's see.
I've gone through my coffee, so.
That's not a good sign at all. We're gonna have to zoom through these. Hopefully, you've got just about enough caffeine to get through these.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the ways in which conceptual game design differs from televisual, dramatic, or cinematic design, as they all involve an investment in immersion in different ways? So it's a question about the immersion of game design versus the traditional, more televised media.
Yeah. So I come from a screenwriting background. I was actually, before screenwriting, was playwriting, right? And in playwriting, right, your actors are on a stage and they're giving an experience. And in playwriting, you actually talk about your audience as participants, which is interesting, right? Because, there's the aside. Shakespeare's A Comedy of Errors, right, is a great example of where you have a play that's being performed, but there are asides directly to the audience. You're talking to them, right? In the film and in televised media, you're not talking to in some. Deadpool is a great example of a modern comedy of errors, if you will, right? It breaks the fourth wall. But in normal, right, tradition, or television, you are watching something. You're not a participant in that. And when you design an experience in a televised medium or in a movie or a film, you're looking you're looking from the observer's standpoint. You are the camera, right?
Sure.
From a immersion aspect, we're actually in games going kind of back to playwriting, right? Where the player is a participant. And in most cases, the player is the storyteller, right? They are the camera. They're following the story around. Even if it's kind of combat versus cinematic moments that now look like you're watching the action, at the end of the day, creating a game designed experience is all about creating the player as a participant in that story. So whether they are a participant in the traditional sense from playwriting, or they are a participant in that they completely drive that story forward. That's how we look at it. And then, right, each game will be different for that.
That's really interesting. How do you how do the other two feel about this sentiment?
I'll have to agree with Lauren, and she actually said exactly what I was going to say. But basically, to make it a more simplified, not as eloquent way of saying it, in game design, a lot of times the story and how it unfolds is all within the player. The player drives that story, whereas in a film, you're the participant watching it. And I think that's totally the difference between the two.
Well, I suppose it's sort of the difference between the idea of how you ideally want it to be viewed or received by an audience, or whether you prefer, creating something that allows maybe the viewer to interpret it for themselves. Which path do you take, Claudia, or if either of them, or maybe you use sort of your path in between?
No, I also agree, but I think it can be a lot more difficult actually to create an immersive experience in games, which sounds kind of ironic because the viewer's in control, right, for a lot of the story. And yet I've heard a lot of game designers express a sentiment in the past that for some reason it's very challenging for them to psychologically engage the audience, and they haven't quite reached that level of immersion yet. Again, generally speaking, as films have, it's still a challenge that they're tackling very much day to day with every new game.
Yeah, and especially with emerging technologies and stuff like that as well. Sorry, I interrupted you, Lauren.
No, it's totally fine. I think that the sentiment comes from these two different types of design mentalities. Now, going super academic here, I'm a reader response theorist. And so in literary theory, reader response means that the reader's interpretation of a work of art is valid, even if the second authorial intent, right, response is that the author meant something else. This translated for me really well from my English lit degree into a game design master's, because I was already like, if the reader reads something and thinks that it's true, boom. Like if the player plays something and thinks that it's true, that's the story. But it's really hard, like Claudia's saying, when a game designer has this experience or this idea that they really want the player to feel. And then in an immersive environment, you can't make someone feel something because they're in control, right? And so if there is a designer driven experience, you can't make the player feel that way, right? And so then there's also player driven experiences as well. So I think that that's where the challenge comes in.
Well, I think this next question actually trails on from that very well. In fact, the next question is that, video game development, it's a very collaborative field with many creative people and many differing opinions. Regardless of whether you've worked in the video game industry before, how do you handle feedback or conflict of opinion with regards to a creative piece of work that you have made?
I guess I could start this one. I would say that's no different in any sort of creative field, though. I would say, like, just to kind of throw that out there, within the visual effects and film realm or television, that's all the same. You're working with a bunch of people to create one bigger vision. And I think the one thing that I've always kind of learned over time is just remember that you're one piece of the puzzle. You're basically one part of a team trying to make a bigger entity, bigger than yourself, something that you're trying to create. And just trying to think of that sort of team mentality. What is the best thing for the game or IP you're working on, and just trying to work collaboratively like that. I think the worst thing you could possibly do in an environment like that is have your ego drive you too far. There's a level of it that's good, that gives you drive to do better than what you've done before. But when you get too far invested into that, that's where it can get a little dicey and get kind of difficult. So if you have that mindset that you're there to create something bigger, and remember that you're there as one team member, as a bigger team, trying to create something bigger than, again, something that you can do yourself, then I think that always makes it easier.
I think that puzzle piece analogy was, a very excellent one and very pertinent one. And especially seeing as, you're on a team of people who perhaps have varying tastes as well. It may not be that there's something objectively wrong with your work, but you're supposed to be creating this one vision with many different minds. And yet those minds can have different tastes. How do you try and consolidate this? Claudia, how do you get around this issue when you've got many different people, different tastes coming together to work on something and trying to take one direction with it?
So compromise is very important. If you're someone generally who likes to do things kind of like standalone group projects, let's say, you have to experience it at least once, because it really is like a mental challenge for you as well as a technical challenge. But you're right. You have to get past these insecurities and this ego that you have deep down, because everyone's working on this, so you're just one piece of the puzzle, right? A lot of the time you'll find that people have outrageous ideas that you just straight up disagree with, and you're like, you can't go through with this. So it's healthy to sort of express, in a kind of safe environment, but you can't let that drive your emotions and later sort of deteriorate the project. I personally found that the best group projects that I've seen were ones where people communicated and collaborated from the beginning, and even if they had completely different tastes, because they expressed their opinions, because they had this communication, it was still a success in the end, more so than with people who were very set in their ways, and then ended up with a project that you could just see the pain in that project that they in big studios especially, you'll find, there's often someone looking over there's hundreds of artists working on one thing, right? And sometimes their vision is just not what you want to be working on, but you have to think that it's the client, right? It's the client, it's what they want, and you have to work towards that. and you can always do your own work on the side and do something else. But
Yeah.
at that moment, when you're working on a group project, there is a bigger end goal, right? And that's to finish it, to get to that vision that someone else had.
That's, I mean, that's about the big pain in the project, the infinite pain in the project. Have you experienced that before, Lauren?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's the push and pull, right? That's the struggle. That's the
yeah, we come back around. We come back around full circle.
Yep. But I can't really offer any better words than have already been spoken. I mean,
that's fair enough. Well, perhaps I'll put this next question to you, where they're still coming in. Do you create artistic works of your own to inspire your game design methodology in addition to your wider research into others' works? So it's the combination. Do you try to combine both together as best you can, or are you more one than the other? I think that's the question being asked.
Okay. So as I'm sure everyone on the panel can agree, like we absolutely do our own work on the side, right? It's that creative freedom that we get from creation. We're creators. We love to create. Currently, right now, because it's on my mind, one of my friends is buying a house, and so I am into perspective and like level layouts. Well, I actually came from a desire to go into interior design. And so I am currently doing like perspective drawings of like small apartments and like old houses that you want to make new. Like that's actually what I'm currently working on, which seems completely different than a game design. But when you look at all of the research you need to do to create a believable environment, now that I think about it in this panel, it actually is very relevant. Like it is about creating kind of realistic and a livable space, even if it's using modern furniture like that you'd hack from IKEA versus the normal stuff that I would look at other people's works, right? And so I absolutely am creating things like that. I write on the side, and it's important. It's really important to look at the different things that you can do as well, even if it's just booting up Unreal Engine and putting in some of your models and trying to figure that out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you relate to that, Vincenzo?
Oh, totally. I live by doing personal work on the side, honestly, and it creatively invigorates me as well. I'm sure with like everyone else here, when you do your own work, you can feel like you can express your own internal feelings and emotions and creativity and your own sort of flavor. I oftentimes too, if I'm working on a project that's very specific, like a science fiction based project that's set in a very specific type of world, that doing personal art that kind of explores that realm also helps inform whatever I'm working on as a professional project, because I can kind of get a sense of the flavor of design and how things are put together. So I think it benefits in lots of ways. Not only that, but then you're also sharpening your skills for later on as well to do that stuff.
Yeah, on the line of sharpening your skills, I mean, do you think that, Claudia, that's a sort of a valid path to follow in sharpening your own skills for later development?
Yeah, definitely. I also like doing personal work is really important for me as well. I think you have to do your own projects on the side, and that can often inform other work that you do outside of that. And the biggest thing is actually with problem solving. Like the more you work on something, and say I'm sat down, doing my own little thing. It's like a little silly project, but hey, I came across this problem one time, and I realized, oh wait, I'm doing this wrong. Okay, and working on a solution for like a whole day, but then I eventually work it out, and I'm like, oh my god, I just remembered this problem that we had in that other project that we were doing as a group, and I think I have a solution for it, right? And that feeds into it, and then you can go off and kind of feed that into other projects. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, you can't just be locked in to one thing. You have to you can't be scared to experiment.
Yeah, well, on that point of experimentation, we've got many people actually. I don't know what that was. It was a bird outside, apparently. I didn't know how loud that was. He's just perched right outside my window and he's looking at me. Okay. I guess even the birds are tuning in today, folks. They're tweeting.
They're tweeting. Real life immersion. So
it really is. It's
so meta.
We've got some comments here. Fantastic point about the accessibility and the diversity of production and reception environments. And then love the shout out for theatre as a participatory form of media with a little heart there. We've got so many questions. We really don't have time to go through all of them. I'm sorry. We'll just leave on one question that might benefit quite a lot of people. What advice would the three of you, individually and perhaps collectively, maybe there's crossovers here, what advice would you give to someone who's fresh out of academia and looking for a position in your industry? Of course, it's probably depending on what you're going for, but perhaps more general advice might be good for the viewers at home. Are we going to the birds first?
Okay.
Or are we going...
I guess,
Yes, I think we should go to the birds
I
first.
I can start.
Yeah, you should start. You should start, Vinny. I was actually going to say, because you're actually you're right at that cusp, right? You're a professor and you're in the industry. So
yeah, so I would say if you want to be a concept artist in this industry, as you know, there's a very competitive field and there's a lot of people that want to do this stuff. But what makes you stand out more is your sense of design and what you bring to the table. I think the biggest pitfall I've seen mostly with students and other people trying to get in is that they try to mimic what's already there. And a lot of times concept artists are hired to create new stuff that inspires other people to have for a new generation. So I would say, kind of piggyback what we've said before, but learning different fields and applying that work into your own work. So like studying fashion, studying graphic design, studying architecture, bringing your own flavor to your work, really showing that you understand design and how to design, as opposed to making pretty pictures, which is, I guess, another sort of thing people think about when they think of concept art is we make a bunch of pretty pictures, which is not necessarily the case. We're designers. So being a well-rounded designer would be the advice I would give.
So innovation and variety, really
Yes.
The name of the game there. How about you, Claudia? What do you prize above others?
I would say not being scared to try. Again, it's such a competitive industry. It's really hard to feel, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed from time to time and feel like you're not good enough, to apply for this, apply for that. Like you see this list of entry requirements, right, all the time for like a job description, and you won't always hit every single point. But if you feel like you're sort of getting there, like apply anyway, because the worst thing that can happen is, they say no, but you have to kind of throw those insecurities out of the window to make a start. Just don't be scared to show off your work and to continue getting better, but also show that you have like this determination, right? The willingness to get better and better each time, because by applying for a job, you're not saying, hey, I'm the best at this. You're also saying, I think I'm good enough for this, I can do this, right? You're up for the challenge. Because it's always going to be a challenge, even if you hit all the entry criteria. Like whether you're super experienced or not, everyone struggles, I think. So just, don't be scared.
So having the perseverance and perhaps the determination to improve as well upon your existing skills.
Definitely, because this is the sort of field where you never stop learning, especially because the technology is ever evolving. People are constantly new methods are gonna come in and old ones are gonna get outdated, not used anymore. And then, senior artists are going to start looking to junior artists because they actually know a faster way to do something, to approach something that previously took like a day to complete, right?
For sure.
But now you can be done on the click of a button. It's little things like that. Don't think that you can't teach someone something new just because they have more experience than you do.
And that goes, industry and academia as well. I've got to say, that's been my experience in academia as well. How about you, Lauren, with your closing remarks?
Yeah, Claudia, that's an incredible point, really, where it's about not being afraid that your lack of experience creates a lack of your self-worth. It's absolutely not true. And also recognize that whatever you try to achieve or whatever you're going to try to get hired for, or whatever you apply for, that doesn't actually mean you'll get that role. So for me, I was interviewed to be a level designer. I actually got a completely different role, which is systems design. And after being interviewed and getting hired as something different and being put on a different team than was expected, I am now a game designer, which kind of intersects also other completely different teams than when I started. And I think that the most daunting thing for most people when they look at game design is that it is everything. And people think they have to know everything. And so I will let you know that, yes, I know a little bit of everything, but this is like 10 years of my life, having learned like writing or architecture or interior design, to thinking I was going to be in fashion in New York City, to, right, like I've lived a life. So don't expect 10 years of your life doing like 10 minutes of YouTube tutorials, right? But then also knowing that doing 200 hours of something is just as valid, right, as we've been saying here, as someone who, like me, has done 10 years of some level of experience like this. And so you can't be afraid to try. You also can't be afraid to do something that seems completely unrelated, and then you turn out that's actually completely needed for your like your path in life, right? Don't be afraid to try everything. Don't be afraid to start or finish. I know finishing can be hard too. And so just really get yourself out there.
I think that's a really encouraging point to end on. You know, it's about taking every opportunity as it comes, and, you know, don't berate yourself for your, you know, perceived lack of experience or perceived lack of expertise in something, because you might just, you know, get there eventually if you just keep taking those opportunities as they come. And, you know, with that, it is time to wrap up, I'm afraid, everyone. I'm so sorry for the rest of you who have, I've got a pile of questions here that I've yet to go through, but I'm sure if you reach out to our industry panelists over their social media accounts or over their you know, portfolio links, I think Lucy, our mod, will link those now in the chat. And thank you once again to our incredible panelists for their participation. It's been an absolute pleasure to chair your discussion today, birds and all. You can find the links to the portfolios and social media in the chat right about now. And you can also find my academic Twitter account at RhysJames22. That's RHYS. But for now, we'll leave you with the closing remarks from our directors. Thank you again. Till next time. Take care.